Now it's time for Jerry Baker. Now, I hope you all had read everything I sent out about him, but as you may know, he went to that school in England known as Oxford. And from there, the Bank of England. He was an analyst, and then he was an economist in the private sector, and then he was scooped up by the BBC. He briefly experiences the travails of television before going to the Financial Times to disappear as the Tokyo bureau chief. He'll explain that part of disappearing as Tokyo bureau chief for the FT in a minute. And then he became the Washington bureau chief. Then he went to the Financial Times, where he was the U.S. editor and instrumental in managing their worldwide coverage. And he joined the Wall Street Journal as deputy editor-in-chief and is now, as of a year ago, or actually a year and a half, the editor-in-chief. And I think you all have noticed the changes in the paper. It's a very vibrant paper, and I think many of the fears that Rupert Murdoch was going to destroy the place have turned out to be not only unfounded, but it's in many ways a much better paper than it was before. And now, Jerry, and feel free to dispute that with not me, but with the editor-in-chief. Tell him what you wanted to change about the paper. He also sends out, he's very interactive. He's got a Twitter account or people twittering for him. I don't know whether he's like Kanye West and he does it himself or not. But he puts out a 10-point bulletin every morning at about 7:15 about what to read in the paper. The journal's firing on all cylinders, video, internet, you name it. And, of course, now it's a standalone operation, no Fox TV to rely on. So we'll hear all about that. Jerry, please come up. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Alan. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for being here. I understand, as Alan said, that you don't often convene in June, so thank you for staying on and being here. I hope your delay is not it wasn't a waste of time for you. I'll try and make it as interesting and provocative as I can. You heard a little bit about my biography there from Alan, who very kindly gave you some of the details. I always feel in these circumstances that I need to give a little bit of a background when I go to places and I say to people I'm introduced as the editor-in-chief of the Wall Street Journal and Dow Jones. People think, but you're a Brit. You know, they hear that accent and they think, what's going on? Of course, there's been a lot of talk about the British takeover of the U.S. media in the last year or two here in New York, particularly, as you know, the chief executive of the New York Times, former colleague of mine, actually, at the BBC, the president of NBC News is a Brit. They're sort of everywhere. So I always kind of, I feel a little bit self-conscious. Even though I've lived in the States for 20 years, I always feel that I kind of perhaps owe some explanation as to how this perfidious Englishman ended up running America's largest newspaper. And I think perhaps the best way I can describe it is to tell one of my favorite stories, one of my favorite jokes that the English like to tell about themselves. And we do realize that we're not the great power that we once were, but perhaps that hasn't completely sunk in. And so we still like to think of ourselves as somewhere or another being able to project ourselves around the world. And the story that reflects this rather well is one told about the British Prime Minister. And it goes like this. One day God calls down from heaven, and he calls on President Obama, President Xi Jinping of China, and Prime Minister David Cameron. And he calls them up to heaven, and he says, I've got very important news for you. You've got to go back to your people and tell them that the world is going to end tomorrow. So President Obama goes back on national television in the US, goes on all channels and says, I've got good news and bad news. The good news is there is a God, and we God-fearing, devout Americans have been right about that all along. The bad news is I've met him, and he's told me the world's going to end tomorrow, and we've got to get ready for it. President Xi goes back to Beijing, goes on national television, and says to the Chinese people, I've got bad news, and frankly, even worse news. The bad news is there is a God, and we, atheist Chinese, have been wrong about that. Communists have been wrong about that all along. The even worse news is I've met him, and he's told me the world's going to end tomorrow, and we've got to get ready for it. Prime Minister David Cameron goes back to London, goes on national television and says to the British people, great news. God considers me to be one of the 3 most important people in the world. So forgive me if that essential Britishness we can't quite suppress that sense of misplaced sense of self-importance. But it is a real pleasure. It's a great pleasure to be here. This is a very august, very venerable institution, full of very august and very venerable people, and it's full. I mean, full of. I mean, I didn't say partly full. Full of. No, it's a great pleasure and privilege for me actually to be here and to have the opportunity to talk to you and perhaps to answer some of your questions about what's going on at the Wall Street Journal. It's a little bit. It's a little bit intimidating to be in front of so many great journalists, so many people whose names I've known for many years and read with great respect and admiration. So forgive me if I try and talk so long that I manage to make sure that I have no time left for questions at the end, because believe me, I've been the giver of questions over many years, and I'm not so keen to be on the receiving end. I thought I would actually seriously, very briefly though, give you just a little overview. As Alan said, it's been a turbulent time in journalism generally. Obviously, there's been a lot of changes in the news business, and there's been changes at the Wall Street Journal. As you all know, this year, well, I hope you know, this year the Journal we're actually celebrating our 125th anniversary. We've got a big events plan, big celebration plan next month. The very first edition of the Wall Street Journal appeared on July the 8th, 1889, and on July the 8th, 2014, next month, you'll see a very special edition of the Wall Street Journal. I can give you a sneak preview of that, and we're very much looking forward to celebrating 125 years and looking forward perhaps to the next 125 years. But of course, as you know, there have been a lot of changes at the Journal. We've done a lot differently in the last few years. As Alan said, News Corp took over at the end of 2007, and we have made a lot of changes. What we've tried to do is to preserve intact the Journal's terrific reputation, well established, well earned over a long period of time for the highest quality journalism. But we've tried to give it a more modern sensibility, a more digital sensibility, and we tried to broaden its reach too. I think the Journal historically has been seen as a business, financial, economic newspaper, almost exclusively. But what we've done in the last few years is we've added substantially to that palette by increasing our coverage of other aspects of news, and I'll talk a little bit about that. One interesting little vignette, though, is that as we looked at our 125th anniversary plans, we got the copy of the first edition in 1889, and I was struck by the fact that there is actually, as you'll see next month, there is actually a sports story on the front page of the Wall Street Journal that day. It was the last actually bare knuckles fight that took place in the United States, and it's an account of the fight that took place. So, although things have changed a lot, and we have introduced sports coverage, we have introduced much more culture, arts, fashion, entertainment, movies, music. We've increased our general news, we've increased political news, we've significantly increased our international news. I'd like to think that we've been able to do all that, extend the reach of the Journal, but at the same time remain true to the Journal's values, which are really the most important thing about it. So again, so I thought what I'd do is just tell you a little bit about how I see the news business, particularly what we've been doing at the Journal to adapt to the challenges and to seize the opportunities of the news business. And as I say, then with a bit of luck, I won't have any time for questions. But no, seriously, I'll have some time for questions at the end. So obviously, there are 3 or 4 main areas that I think that when I think about what we're doing, what we need to do, which pose both challenges and opportunities. There are 4 main areas that I think we need to think about and tackle. The first, obviously, far and away the most important, is the digital transformation of the way in which news is delivered. I really do think it's very easy sometimes to get a rather ahistorical perspective. Everybody thinks that they're living in the most interesting and dramatic and full of change times in our history, and we have to guard against that. But I think in terms of the history of the newspaper business, I do think what's happened in the course of the last 20 years or so with the advent of the internet, with the advent of digital news, the availability of digital content, I think that is the most dramatic change that the newspaper business has faced really since its inception a couple of hundred years ago. And it manifests itself obviously in all kinds of different ways. I mean, obviously the baleful effect that everybody is very focused on has been the significant negative impact it's had on newspaper revenues. And there's no hiding that. We have seen a dramatic decline, as you know, in print advertising revenue. We don't break out our own figures as companies don't, but you can see from the industry figures that print advertising revenue is down by something like 50% in the course of the last 12 years. So it's a dramatic, that kind of change in an industry usually destroys or at best transforms the industry, and I think that's absolutely what we've seen. Of course, you've seen a lot of newspapers, in addition to facing massive print advertising revenue declines, have seen dramatic falls in their print circulation. Not as much in many cases as the print advertising revenue decline, but still significant. Some newspapers have gone completely by the wayside. Some have disappeared. Some have gone to print only once or twice a week. I think that process will continue. I think the economics of producing newspapers on a much smaller revenue base from the advertising side militate significantly against the ability to continue to produce a daily print newspaper for many smaller newspapers. And I think, regrettably, that will be the way that we can expect them to go. So that's obviously the broad, the industry perspective, as you know. And obviously what everybody is doing to try and adapt to that is to create digital models. Now, the Wall Street Journal, I have to say, absolutely no thanks to me or any of my colleagues, but to our predecessors who had the foresight when the internet came along in the mid-1990s to ensure that the journal would be paid for digitally as well as in print. As you remember, back then, everybody simply raced into the internet, put their newspapers, their content from their newspapers up for free, and the journal's CEO and the journal's leaders at that time said, well, we're not going to do that. People should pay for our content, and they will. And that's been a very important factor in the journal's relative strength over the last 20 years, and particularly over the last 10 years, having that core base of digital subscribers. As Alan very kindly said, we are the largest selling daily newspaper in the United States, about 2.3 million total subscribers for the journal. That is roughly half and half now, digital and print. Print circulation, is no surprise, is declining steadily, but it's still very large. We still sell, by the way, 1.3 million print copies of the newspaper every day. So even as we make that digital transition and we embrace the opportunities that the digital journalism present, we're also very mindful that we have a print product and we have a print readership that still wants to read us in print. And it's an enormous one, and even if it declines at roughly the current pace right now, it will still be a very significant part of our circulation and obviously a very significant part of our revenue. So we've got to make sure that even as we make the changes that I will talk about to become more digital, that we actually maintain the strength of the print newspaper too. And what we've been able to do, I think, so far, again, is we've tried, and largely successfully, I would argue, to do that, to make sure that we are embracing the digital experience while at the same time giving people a strong print product too. And I think this is the crucial thing, I won't bore you with statistics, many of which you'll have heard before anyway, that I think when I talk to my staff about the importance of becoming more digital, a more digital news organization, the single most important statistic that I cite for them is one that matches the readership, readers' behavior with with revenue patterns. And right now, even as print advertising revenue has declined dramatically over the last 10 or 12 years, print advertising revenue still accounts for about 20% of companies' total advertising spend, about 1/5. Because of the decline in print readership, which has been significant, and of course the flowering of digital readership, the proportion of readers' time that is spent actually with print products is about 10%. So there is still a huge mismatch. There is still, if you like, an overspend. I hope not, but that's certainly the danger. There is still a huge mismatch between what advertisers are spending, what companies are spending to advertise their products, and the amount of attention that those commercials, those advertisements are actually getting. And that's the challenge for us. So we can be reasonably certain that number, that print advertising, certainly perhaps not in total nominal terms, will decline still further. And we have to make sure that what we try and do is make sure that our share is larger, but obviously accelerate the move into digital advertising, into digital journalism, which is what we're doing. So how are we doing that? Well, I think on one of the, to me, again, fascinating things coming from both a television and a print journalism background is the way in which when new forms of media come along, when new platforms come along, the first tendency, the way in which organizations first get themselves into that new medium is essentially to take their existing product and to put it flat out into the new medium. And we did that. We all did that. And to some extent, although we've changed, there is still an element of that about everything, every newspaper that presents itself digitally. It still looks like a newspaper. If you look at the Wall Street Journal website or the New York Times website, there's still, we preserve. And that's a good reason for that. We want to preserve, to some extent, some of the form so that it reminds people that that is the spirit of what we're doing remains the same. But at the same time, what we need to do more, we've begun to do aggressively at the Journal, but we need to do much more, and everybody I think needs to do much more, is to understand the separate, the very separateness and distinctness that is the digital medium, and the opportunities as well as the challenges that the digital medium represents. And just a few of those, I would say a number, just a couple of particularly important points that we've focused on a lot at the Journal recently. Social media is a very good example, and that's a very good example of the way in which people change their reading habits. In the first days of the internet, people would read a newspaper essentially in the way that they would read a newspaper when it was in print. They would come to the home page, which was the front page, and they'd look at what they saw on the home page, and then they'd click on stories that they saw that were inside, read either stories that were on the front page or from the table of contents what was inside. Most of our readers don't now come to us through the homepage. A very small proportion now, and a diminishing proportion, come to us through the homepage. They come to us through search, obviously, Google, principally, Yahoo, others. But they come to us increasingly through social media, too, through Facebook, through Twitter, through LinkedIn, and others. And so we have to change the way in which our journalists think about what they're doing to recognize that. And as somebody put it very well, not at my newspaper, but somewhere else, in the past, we used to just assume that readers would come to us. What's one of the fundamental changes of the digital era is we have to go out and find readers. We have to tell people what we're doing. We have to explain what we're doing. That's why we tweet and why we put likes on Facebook and why we engage with people on LinkedIn. That's a very important part now of what journalists have to do and how it's changed what we do. We spend a lot of time thinking about that. I'll give you another important element, which is the visual dimension. And again, as someone who who started in journalism, in television journalism, and worked for the BBC for 10 years, this is striking to me as almost a sort of a return to my roots. The digital experience for readers, for users these days, is much, much closer to a television experience, much closer to the experience that we were growing up with when we had television screens, than it is to the print newspaper experience. It is a heavily visual experience. So we as newspaper editors and journalists have got to get that dimension into everything we do, whether it is attractive pictures, interactive graphics, video, all the other things that are necessary, because that is how people consume it. And so we're spending, again, a lot of time thinking about how we can improve the visual quality of our journalism to make it more engaging. And a third element, which is, of course, really important, is the way in which people, the devices on which people are receiving our journalism. Again, even this is a sign of the dramatic change. 10 years ago, the vast majority of digital readers were reading us on desktops, reading us on their laptops or whatever. Now, just under a majority of our readers, but I'm absolutely certain in the next 2 to 3 years, a significant majority of our readers will be coming to us through mobile devices. Some of it tablets, but increasingly through smartphones. So again, we have to. A lot of the effort that we're doing is taking our journalism and making it more accessible to an audience that's reading us on mobile devices. So these are just some of the challenges we face. Everybody focuses on the challenges of the digital world and what it's done to revenues and what it does to the newspaper model. I think actually, however, if we get these right, if we get these opportunities right, we can actually exploit those opportunities and make the newspaper reading experience or consuming experience much better. So there are 1,000 other issues related to the digital revolution, but that's the primary set of daily challenges and opportunities that we spend our time thinking about as we become a more digital news organization, while, as I say, at the same time, maintaining an important print product. I want to talk a little bit about what we've done in terms of the content of the newspaper and what we're trying to do with the newspaper. I believe very firmly that a lot of people have said, when you came in, you used to do business and finance and economics, and now you do everything else, and you don't do business and finance and economics as well, or in the degree to which you used to. That's actually not true. We do more business, finance, economics journalism than we used to. We just do a lot of other stuff too. And I'll tell you the reasoning behind that. It's twofold, really. First of all, I think the Journal needs to be and will continue to be primarily a business-focused newspaper. That is, I think, that's our brand, that's our reputation, that's where our quality is, that's what people expect from us. They expect the best in business journalism, and we will continue to do that. But I think I'd say there are two factors going on. One is business journalism has become incredibly central to all journalism these days, to the world. When I started off as an economist, I worked in the City of London, and then I started off as an economics journalist back in the 1980s. Back in those days, it was true in Britain, and I know it was true to some extent in the US too, I think to a lesser extent, but it was true here too. Business and economics journalism was seen as a little bit of a kind of a backwater. The glamorous stuff was all war correspondents and political correspondents, White House correspondents or political correspondents at Westminster. Business was seen as a little bit kind of nerdy and a little bit obscure and a little bit kind of wasn't really central to what most people who were attracted to journalism really wanted to do. I think one thing we've learned over the last 20 years, we particularly learned over the last 5 or 6 years, that simply is no longer true. And actually, there has been a significant gravitation of some of the best talents in journalism around the world towards business journalism, as people have come to understand how important business is, as we've moved to increasingly complex financial markets, as the centrality of business and economics in people's lives has become more established. The need for good business and economic and financial journalism is greater than ever. And so that will remain our core, both because we do it very well, it's our brand, but also because I think it's the most important category of journalism that we do. But I think I'll say one other thing on the way in which we've changed the newspaper. I think the great opportunity for the Wall Street Journal is, even as we maintain our excellence and our primacy in the area of business journalism, we can reach a much broader audience by doing other stories, by doing politics, by doing international news, by doing sports and culture and entertainment. And the proof is there. I think one of the biggest changes in US journalism, newspaper journalism in the last 20 years, and I think this is continuing, is the evolution away from the big city model of newspapers towards what I think are becoming essentially increasingly national news organizations competing for coverage of national news. When I started in the US 20 years ago, I remember being struck. I went to the White House. I covered the White House for the Financial Times for a while. And I remember being struck going along to those White House press briefings every day, and there was this phalanx of journalists, 60, 70 print journalists, with their little brass names, plaques on the chairs in the White House press briefing room, from every major city newspaper in the United States. And it struck me at the time, even then, this was just at the dawn of the internet period, this was a lot of people covering the same story, essentially, and that you had the St. Louis Post-Dispatch White House correspondent and the Houston Chronicle White House correspondent and the Chicago Tribune and the Baltimore Sun. Every major newspaper had its own White House correspondent. Most of the major newspapers had their own London correspondents or their own Paris correspondents or Moscow correspondents. Most of them covered they had business correspondents. They covered international finance. They covered way beyond their local regional interests. Because they were the primary source of all news for that regional readership. That's gone. That model is destroyed. There is now, since the internet, since anyone can get any information that they want from any news source 24 hours a day, there really isn't the need. If you live in Baltimore, Baltimore Sun's an excellent newspaper. I like it, and I like the way it's made some changes in the last few years. But there really isn't any. You can read so many sources of national news, international news, business news, financial news. It's all there. It's all available. So that role, that kind of semi-monopoly that some of these big city American newspapers had has really gone. And I think what's left in its wake, as I say, is increasingly a national market. And I think that's the great opportunity for the Wall Street Journal. I think there will be 3 or 4 national newspapers, nationally dominant newspapers that have the resources, the reach, the national reach to genuinely cover national stories, international stories in the depth and in the range that they demand. And we will absolutely be one of those. So in doing that, we can become, in order to do that, we've expanded our reach. So we cover all of those things that we didn't do before. And the response has been very, very favorable, whether it is our weekend sections, which review, which is a serious ideas-based section, or off-duty, which is a more consumer-focused section, the magazine, which we publish now with a frequency of more than once a month, Arena on Fridays, or Mansion about real estate. We have broadened our reach, and at the same time, obviously, that's enabled us to increase our circulation, while at the same time maintaining our leadership in business, financial, and economic journalism. So this is, I think, one of the most important changes that we're seeing in the structure of the news business in the United States, and we're embracing that, and I think we'll continue to embrace it. And I think, us and a few other news organizations will dominate that. I don't think, by the way, big regional newspapers will all disappear. There will still be a demand, obviously, for coverage of local news and local business, regional news and regional business, but I think we are gravitating pretty rapidly towards a more, if you like, a more European model of the geography of journalism, which is that you will have national newspapers, and I can assure you the Wall Street Journal will be dominant in that. Thirdly, another big trend that we are embracing, and I think we're enjoying some success, although we can do better, is the global dimension. We again have, one of the fundamental transforming characteristics of the digital revolution is that it dramatically expands the reach of every content provider everywhere in the world, every news organization. So we can now reach every reader who has an internet connection or a smartphone anywhere in the world, and we see that as an enormous opportunity. The Journal's reputation for quality journalism, again, I think is unrivaled. And I think as you look at parts of the world, especially parts of the world where perhaps a free press, a free, vibrant, independent press that is challenging, that is holding institutions and people accountable, where that kind of a press has not really been a strong feature of various countries around the world, and there are a lot of places like that still, I think the opportunity for a paper like the Wall Street Journal with a reputation for doing that is absolutely immense. And that's what we do. We are expanding what we do internationally. We're expanding our reach. We've launched several local language newspaper, digital websites. We now have 6: China, Japan, Indonesia, Turkey, Germany, and Korea, and we'll do more. We are very committed to reaching the broader audience, to bringing Wall Street Journal journalism to that broader audience, and I think that's a big opportunity for us. Both obviously a commercial opportunity, there's no denying that. I think it's also a really good opportunity for us to bring the quality, the values, the standards of a free press to the rest of the world, and I take that very seriously, and I'm very, very enthusiastic about it. And that leads me to my last point, which is the most important point of all, which is that even as we face these challenges and opportunities, we have to make sure that we are doing what really matters. And we have to constantly remind ourselves, in an increasingly competitive and rather turbulent environment, we have to remind ourselves why we do what we do and what it is about what we do that is so special. And that is serious accountability journalism. It's about ensuring that people, as I say, are held accountable. Institutions, governments, companies are held accountable for their decisions. You're all journalists. We all take this for granted, I think, here, which is a great thing. But again, there are parts of the world where, as you know, that isn't the case. And much more importantly, I think there are pressures in the United States, even in the United States, which I absolutely regard as the cradle of free journalism and free press. There are pressures here that are making that harder and much more difficult. There is the pressure. There's the commercial pressure that I've talked about, the simple financial pressure that many news organizations are unable to sustain themselves, and that's a big problem, because as they go out of business, they not only disappear, but they might be tempted to do things to keep themselves afloat that actually are not consonant with the values of decent quality, high quality journalism, and you're starting to see some of that. And we have to be incredibly careful to guard against that, because we will lose that vital, energetic and independent and free press if we don't. I think you're also seeing another element you see is there is so much. One of the things that is a blessing of the internet, but also it can be condign in some of its manifestations is the flourishing of content. There's no question that there is actually more. I mean, one of the reasons for optimism about journalism, about news, if you like, is that there is so much more now. There's so much more available. And when I was growing up in England, you had three television channels that had news divisions, and you had in Britain, you've always had a healthy, very competitive national newspaper market. You had like 11 national newspapers, but that was really it. There was then some magazines, weekly magazines, of course, that were also very high quality. That was it. Now there is literally a boundless number of news organizations or organizations that purport to be doing news that are out there and that are making life competitive. In some ways, in good ways and in bad ways. In good ways, because I think they do sharpen our instincts. They require us to be more digitally savvy. They require us to be more urgent and to be more and to be more competitive, actually, to go out and get the news. But obviously in bad ways, because just as Gresham's law in economics is that bad money drives out good, there is a risk here that as many of these news organizations that are done on a shoestring, that are not very well funded, as they put out so-called news, many of them putting out stories that really aren't very well reported, are not well sourced, are not properly investigated, as they put out so-called stories, the pressure on everybody else to follow them, to do that same kind of journalism, obviously only grows. And there have been countless examples in the last 2 or 3 years of these organizations, and I won't name them, but that have put out stories that are supposed to be true, that we then spend a lot of time chasing and finding out are not true. But actually, by the time, as you all know as journalists, by the time you've spent a lot of time finding out that somebody else's story is not true, nobody cares. Because the first story is the one that got the headlines and the one that got the interest and sparked the viewers' interest. So that is a challenge. That is a real challenge. It's not just that we need to stay true to the values of independent journalism because we've got an opportunity to bring it to the rest of the world. But I think very much in the developed economies with these incredibly vibrant news environment, we have to make sure that we continue to do that journalism. That's the most important thing we do. That's the trust that we have with our readers is the most important thing that we have. I believe really strongly in the journal. The journal's reputation, the journal's ability to do that has been unrivaled. We look at surveys every few years, and we are the most trusted news organization in the world. More people trust us. They think what we do is accurate, fair, reliable, objective than any other news organization in the world. And I take that incredibly seriously. That matters to me enormously. And so that is the biggest challenge of all. But I think we have the resources. I think we have the commitment. I know we have the people. I lead an incredibly talented team of nearly 2,000 journalists. And we'll continue to do that. We'll continue to hold people accountable. We'll continue to keep people informed. And indeed, we'll keep them entertained too. But that's the most important, to me, the most important thing that we do as we face this new environment, that we must maintain those values, we must maintain the quality of that journalism, and under my editorship, the Wall Street Journal will certainly do that. So thank you very much for listening.
Thank you, Jerry. Can you turn this on? Maybe. I think it's on. Now it is. Okay. First, Barbara Levenheim, your first duty as a board member, will you please man this mic and field questions from the audience in a second as soon as I ask this one? Jerry, how does that very smart old newspaper man, Rupert Murdoch, communicate his vision of the paper to you, and how often does he do it?
I mean, I speak to him when he's in New York most days, and he communicates a lot of things to me. Always very, very interesting, very well informed, very insightful. I think what he did, in terms of the vision of the newspaper, some of the things I've talked about are exactly what he talks about. The importance of the global opportunity, the opportunity that's involved in being a national newspaper and competing against other national news organizations and making sure that we are competitive and that we are properly resourced and properly motivated to do that. He talks a lot about that. He talks a lot about and look, I think he talks a lot about the importance of quality journalism. There's a lot of misunderstandings about Rupert Murdoch. Everybody kind of thinks, well, tabloid journalism, and they've seen some of the tabloid journalism and some of the things that have gone on around the world, which they don't like. They forget, though, that Rupert Murdoch bought the Times of London in 1980, 1981, which was failing and would have disappeared completely. One of the most august institutions in journalism. He has poured an enormous amount of money into that publication over a long period of time. It is now making money, which is terrific. But he was prepared to spend money on a quality newspaper like that for a long period of time to improve the quality of it. He launched the Australian newspaper, which is far and away the highest quality newspaper in Australia. And again, I think what I would say is, in terms of what you said at the beginning, what he's done with the Wall Street Journal speaks much louder than anything he says or anybody else may say, which is that he bought the Wall Street Journal 7 years ago. There were a lot of stuff was talked about what he may do with it. We have maintained the values of the journal, and I would argue we've strengthened the quality of the journalism. We've improved a lot of what we do. We've broadened our reach. We've invested in the journalism. We do more things now than we ever used to do. We have broken some of the most important stories out there. We have done, whether it's in business or finance or economics or politics or international affairs, we have a stellar team, and that's really, frankly, that's thanks to Mr. Murdoch, to his willingness to invest in it and his willingness to keep supporting us.
One follow-up on that. What time of day does he call you?
It varies, actually. If he's in the building, he may come down and stroll down and have a chat. He loves being in newsrooms. I mean, he's a newsman, as you know. His father, of course, was a great journalist, and he loves the news business. So if he's in the building, he'll often come down and stroll to the newsroom and have a chat. But it could be any time of the day.
Who's got a question? Barbara, we'll start with an easy with Steve. Please identify yourselves, by the way.
I'm Steve Shepard. Thanks very much for that presentation. It was very good. I think on the point of people's expectations about what Rupert was going to do with the paper, I think you covered it very well. And I think the consensus seems to be he didn't turn it into Fox News or the New York Post. He didn't degrade it in that sense. And all the additions are great, the cultural stuff, the international, even the sports, which I read. But the one thing that I hear, which resonates with me, and I'd like to hear your response to it, is that the longer front page stories, and in particular the investigative journalism of the Wall Street Journal, isn't what it was, manifested by the fewer, if any, Pulitzer Prizes that the journal has won over this 7-year period. And I just wonder what your take on the investigative report. I know you've broken a lot of stories, but in the investigative, the longer stories, how would you respond to that criticism?
Well, I don't get hung up about story length. I mean, I always say to my editors and reporters, I've read stories that were way too long at 200 words, and I've read stories that could have gone on twice as long at 5,000 words. So I think there was a little bit of an obsession, a sort of fetishism about having these long stories, that a story wasn't really a proper story unless it was 3,000 words long, which to me, growing up as a journalist, when I was learning journalism, is exactly the opposite of what we were taught, which is that that the point of journalism is to be as concise as you can be. I followed George Orwell's principles of writing from a very early age, and nowhere does he say that the quality of anything you write is judged by its length. So I think there was a little bit of an obsession with length. We still do run. We've done a lot of investigative stories. For example, I'll just give you some examples. We've been running some stories recently, and we'll have more. We were the ones who, through a FOIA request, got this Medicare data out of the federal government. We've done a lot of digging through that. We've broken a lot of the stories there about some of these highly questionable diversion of Medicare resources. We did some terrific investigative journalism in China. We broke most of the important elements of the story about Bo Xilai. You remember the Chinese Politburo, the Chinese governor who in Chongqing, who was accused, eventually convicted of corruption. We, through some really difficult reporting, we broke a lot of those stories. Look, I can point to dozens of really big, important investigative stories we've done, and I can say to you, it's extraordinarily important. I take it very, very seriously. But I do, on the long form question, I do think people get hung up about it, and I don't. I think you can. Sometimes absolutely long-form journalism has a crucial role, and some stories demand to be written at 5,000 words. I published a story under my editorship last year that was 40,000 words long. It was a story it was an investigation about a series of families who had been denied drug treatment by an FDA ruling for their very sick children, and a terrific piece of reporting by our reporter Amy Doxer-Marcus. She wrote, we published the first one in the paper, we published another 37,000 words online. It's one of the longest stories probably the journal's ever done. We published another story also last year, terrific piece of reporting by one of our Washington reporters on the lobotomies that were carried out on veterans, US veterans after World War II. That ran, I think, at altogether about 10,000 words. So I don't get hung up on the length thing. I think we should strive to write as concisely as we can, but if that demands a 40,000 word story, I'll publish it. If it demands a 150 word brief, I'll publish that. So, people make those comments, make those observations, and people talk about Pulitzer Prizes. It's, there's a whole different set of issues there, which I won't go into. But I am very, very, very proud of what we've done in all of these fields, and I'm very confident that we will continue to do it, and I'm very, very confident that Rupert Murdoch will continue to give us the resources to be able to do it.
Try Mike Kendall. As a former president, we'll give him.
Mike Candell. I have a two-part question. One, it was an interesting byline on the op-ed page of the paper today by someone named Rupert Murdoch. So the first part of my question is, the editorial page of the Wall Street Journal has been remarkable for its strong opinions in one direction. One of your predecessors always said that when you buy the journal, you get two papers for the price of one, a straight down the middle news section and a very opinionated editorial page, an op-ed page. So my first question is, how do you relate to that part of the paper? And secondly, when Rupert started, I think it was before you came, the New York section, he made it very clear that he was going head-on against the New York Times. Now, probably half the people in this room have worked for either the New York Times or the New York Post, and in many cases both, right? How do you think the paper is done in that quest to go head-to-head against the New York Times in local coverage? And getting back to the first part, what about your relationship with the editorial page?
Well, as you know, Mike, there's the editorial page is a completely separate reporting structure, and that comment from a previous editor of mine is essentially true. It is a complete. I have Paul Gigot, who edits the editorial page. There has no business connection to me. Has no reporting relationship with me. He reports directly to the chief executive of Dow Jones and the publisher of the Wall Street Journal, as I do. We're on completely parallel tracks, and that is a church-state separation that is incredibly rigorously observed. I can assure you there. Both on. I mean, to the point actually sometimes of inconvenience and embarrassment. Sometimes they will run very interesting op-eds from the President of the United States, for example, which has some very important piece of news which we don't know about until literally at 7 o'clock when it goes online. So but I think that those minor inconveniences aside, I think maintaining the separation between news and opinion is absolutely essential. And by the way, we do that. I think many other news organizations, frankly, don't do that, and certainly don't do it as effectively and as rigorously as we do. We are very careful to make sure that the views of the opinion page do not bleed into the coverage in the news section. And on the New York question, look, actually, I was there when when we launched Greater New York. Rupert was very enthusiastic to do that. Still goes. It's a very good, strong, vibrant part of the newspaper. We cover New York more comprehensively, I would argue, now than the New York Times does. We have a standalone section in print every day and a big section available digitally with even more news there. We think, this was to some extent a business decision which I was not involved in, but I think the opportunity was seen that New York Times, as the New York Times strove to become a more national newspaper over the last 20 years, its New York circulation declined quite substantially. And I think there was and again, I'm sort of reporting here secondhand what I think was the view on the business side, which is that there's an opportunity here to, in a in the most important city in the world, as it likes to describe itself, to cover local news, to cover New York news better, more effectively than perhaps the competition were doing. And so that's what we did, and I think that's what we continue to do.
Hi, I'm going to take the opportunity to ask a question since I have this. I run a very small website, which is neither here nor there, but you mentioned that you've lost half of your print advertising. I do know that online...
Actually, I didn't say that. I said the industry. I said the industry has lost half of its print advertising.
The what?
The industry, the newspaper industry in the United States.
Okay.
We don't publish our own figures.
All right. Industry has lost half its print advertising. I know that internet is struggling with getting advertising. So how do you see, and you're an economist, how do you see the internet surviving? Because it isn't advertising, which has always been a major source for newspapers and magazines, is not doing so well on the internet.
Yeah, as you know, advertising is not the rates. The advertising rates for a lot of advertising categories available digitally are much lower than they are in print. What's the phrase? That we're substituting digital dimes for print dollars, and that may slightly exaggerate the ratio between the two rates, but it's not far off it. So it's there's no question that digital has not produced as much as obviously advertising revenue has grown. It hasn't come anywhere close to replacing the lost print revenue. For us, I can't speak for others. I think there are two things I'd say that flow from that. One is I think that picture may get better. I think one of the great things, obviously, about the digital advertising market is it does enable you to target, to know who your readers are, to know, there's that famous line, you'll all have heard it, that somebody once said of a print ad that an advertiser said that I know this ad I know half the readers look at this ad and it matters to them, I just don't know which half. Now people actually, you can track very closely what people are clicking on, how they're experiencing ads. So I think we haven't properly exploited that opportunity yet, and I think we will. But it's the second and I think more important dimension. Again, I'm not a business person, God help us. Thank God I'm not running the business side. But I think the view is from the business side that digital subscription circulation revenue, and I can certainly say that for us, has become enormously important. We've asked digital, as our circulation has risen, and our subscription rates have risen, our circulation, unsurprisingly, our circulation revenue, digital circulation revenue has risen substantially. And we believe again that we can, whether I can't say that we will fill the gap that was left by the decline in print advertising, but I think we can fill quite a lot of it by increasing revenue. Because as you know, again, the great thing about digital circulation as opposed to print circulation is it's very, very, very low cost. The cost of acquisitions are incredibly small. Don't have to print newspapers. You just have to, have you have to have some means of allowing the person to pay and some means of communicating with them, and then you have an additional subscriber. The marginal costs of an additional subscriber are almost very close to zero. So there is a real opportunity there for us to continue to grow our circulation and to raise our revenue and to actually do that within a relatively flat cost rate.
Are you losing money right now, though? I mean, are you breaking even?
Me personally, you mean? No,
not you personally. Is your paper breaking even?
Again, we don't break out we never break out the numbers, but I think we do say publicly because we publish. News Corp is the parent company which publishes its quarterly reports, and it publishes by division, by newspaper division. So we are lumped in with the Times of London, the New York Post, the others. But I think we do say publicly that what is true, which is that we do make money.
Hi there, I'm Helen Johnson, and I, like you, came through television and moved into the digital world as executive producer of Forbes Video at Forbes.com, and have moved on from there. Being that focus and being that, the Wall Street Journal is now split from Fox, which people thought would take advantage of television. How are you focusing on video? What kind of percentages, and are you seeing the higher CPMs adding more value to the digital product?
Yeah, it's a very good point. Yes, we have a very small but rapidly growing video component of what we do, both in terms of traffic and revenue. And I'm very enthusiastic that we grow that. The CPMs are much higher, and frankly, we sell out. We actually are in the position where we almost can't produce enough video for advertisers to advertise against. So the question is, what kind of video do you want to do? And we've gone back and forth on this a bit internally, I think. Initially, there was a period a few years ago where we thought quite seriously about focusing on a kind of a live 24, not quite 24 hours a day, but maybe at least say during the US market day, kind of continuous coverage, being a sort of, if you like, a kind of a competitor to CNBC or indeed Fox Business. I think we felt that in the end that would require an enormous amount of resources, which we frankly didn't have. And also in the end, we thought we could probably build our video. And as the whole video distribution channels are changing so dramatically, and more people now, cutting the cord and receiving video directly to their laptops or to their devices or whatever, we just thought we should focus on doing quality video, packaged video. We do a lot of interviews too and that kind of stuff, but we've worked very hard. We've done sort of special video events. So we're sort of trying a kind of smorgasbord of pretty well every type of video you can imagine, some live. We do still have some live coverage too. But I think that's just an opportunity for us to grow. Look, I think we all know it's easier for people to consume video when they're watching news, and we find that some of our most successful videos, for example, are feature-type videos, which are related to stories. Some of them are standalone stories, but some of them are related to stories. The A-head, which is a very famous, everybody knows it, on the front page of the Wall Street Journal, which is the lighter story that is always at the bottom of the front page on the Wall Street Journal. We do that in video most days now, and that gets very, very high, very, very high numbers. So, it's not. I can't give you a comprehensive answer, but we've grown rapidly, and we want to do a lot more. And I think we've got an opportunity to do a lot more.
How you doing? It's Pat Smith, Rupert Murdoch alum myself. When we read the Wall Street Journal, whether it's in paper, whether it's on a cell phone, whether it's on an iPad, we see a story. We know a reporter has given some thought to the story, checked some sources. We know that an editor has looked at this story and reviewed the story. We have some confidence. How do you apply that level of review and integrity to the tweet? Someone almost as smart as you. I mean, I had a bad experience with people tweeting something that was bad information. Reputable journalists running out, popping out tweets because they had to get out there with it. And someone almost as smart as you said, the tweet is a 140-character fart with no thought behind it, no editor behind it, no review. How do you deal with your journalists and urge them? Do you try and edit their tweets before they go out? How do you bring the integrity of the Wall Street Journal to the tweet?
It's a very good question, and it's one we grapple with. The simple answer is we can't edit them. Okay, we can't. We have 1,900 reporters and editors, most of whom are tweeting. I tweet, which is still how I prefer to think of it than the way you described it. Myself, we do tweet. Look, what we can do is we can do two things. We can absolutely ensure that our reporters and editors understand that they are imbued with the highest values of journalism, and that they apply to a tweet, 140-character expression of what they're reporting, exactly the same values and standards that they apply to the reporting that would go into a front-page story or any other piece of journalism that they do. And we really take that very seriously. We do a lot of digital training at the Wall Street Journal. I didn't mention this, we've spent a huge, and great credit, by the way, again, also to the company for giving us the resources to really train our journalists. And an important part of that training is to make sure that they understand that whether they're tweeting, whether they're posting something on Facebook, whether they're doing something on LinkedIn or anywhere else, they are required to maintain the same high standards. And then secondly, all we can do is we as editors, we can keep as much of an eye on what they're doing as we can, so that we can sort of, almost kind of copy taste or kind of quality control to see that they are maintaining those standards. And, the honest answer is they don't always. And I have myself had occasion to intervene, shall we say, rather directly when I've seen tweets that have been done which either express opinions or which express, derogatory remarks, or let alone ones that, that may just be flat wrong, which unfortunately can happen as well. So look, that's what we can do. I agree with you, but we can't apply the same editing standards that we do. But I think that by making our reporters understand that they are judged in exactly the same way, then we can do that. One particular thing that helps us there is that actually, because we have Dow Jones Newswires, if a reporter has a breaking story, has a story, there's some news to break, as opposed to an opinion to express, which we try to prevent them from doing, they are required to send it first to Dow Jones Newswires. We have people who pay a significant premium to get those stories first. So there is that initial quality control even before they tweet. When they've got stories to break, they do it through the regular editing process of Dow Jones Newswires. But look, I agree. I can't say that every single one of the tens of thousands of tweets that I'm guessing probably go out from the Wall Street Journal every day maintain those high standards, but we really do our very, very best, and I think we do a pretty good job on the whole, to make sure that our reporters maintain those standards and that our editors are looking and monitoring and ensuring that what they're doing is correct.
No, I promised Jerry that we try to get him out before 2 o'clock, so let's start with Ralph. We're going to have just 1 or 2 more questions.
Thank you. Ralph Blumenthal, former New York Times. What do you make of the alliance just announced between the New York Times and the Washington Post to have a new platform for interactive journalism? Is this some kind of a ganging up on the Journal? And secondly, what do you expect from the Post now under Jeff Bezos in terms of a competitor? And are you worried at all about the Amazon connection, especially given the new phone coming out now? And what does that suggest for the future of the big three competition?
Yeah, on the first point, I know I've seen what they do, the stories, the reports of what they're doing. I don't know enough specifically about what they're doing. It's intriguing, obviously. I mean, news organizations do collaborate to some extent on some of these projects, and so I'll have to wait and see, to be honest with you, Ralph, before I actually know what kind of a threat, whether they're ganging up on us. I kind of doubt it, because I doubt, first of all, whether Bezos would really see the Washington Post's future as being sort of in an alliance with the New York Times. I mean, I don't know his mind, but I'm guessing he didn't spend $250 million on the paper to turn it into an adjunct of the New York Times. And secondly, the Washington Post is a paper with a very proud history. I imagine it wants to, and since, by the way, they split over the International Herald Tribune, they have kind of very much gone their own separate ways. So I mean, I'm always conscious of competitive threats. I don't think they're kind of ganging up on us in that respect. And on Bezos, again, I don't know the man very well. I know what he, I know what a success he's made of Amazon, at least in terms of its scale. I think it is, I think when you look at somebody who does something like that, makes an acquisition like that, you obviously ask why. And again, I don't know. I can't read his mind, and I've only seen the public things that he said. But I assume he has a plan, and he has some ideas to bring the Post into the digital era more effectively. I don't know whether there's any possibility of a tie-up with Amazon. I mean, remember, he bought the Washington Post in his personal capacity, not as a division of Amazon. So I don't know whether that means there will be some tie-up. I'd be surprised if there weren't some quote-unquote synergies that maybe they're available there. But I watch with interest. I mean, I think he clearly. They've been hiring. They've been doing some interesting things in the digital field. I think they're doing some very good stuff in the digital field, stuff that we could learn from. And I think, again, as he gets more involved, presumably, and his people get involved, he'll do more of that.
Okay, but one more question. Oh, you've already got a mic. We'll take 2. Do you mind?
What's the time?
It's 5.
Okay.
Evelyn Reynolds. You spoke about the importance of the print readership. Do you think there will be a print edition of the Wall Street Journal in, say, 10 or 15 years? I'm
often asked that question. I think yes is the only. I mean, I've gone. I haven't given as straight an answer as that. I think since I've ever been asked it. But I think I think so. Yes. I mean, I think there will always be people. There will be some. I don't know how. Don't ask me what the circulation will be. There's a famous. A British economist who became prime minister actually made a famous quote which said, "When you're making an economic forecast, give either a number or a date, but never both." I don't know whether the print paper will disappear completely. I think it will be around for a long time. My boss, Robert Thompson, the chief executive of News Corp, was recently quoted as saying print will be around for decades and decades. So that certainly covers the 10 to 15 year time frame you're talking about. So yes, I think it will.
Very quick one.
Last question.
Is it really better for readers if we come to a point where there are 4 national newspapers and Pittsburgh and Oshkosh and Kalamazoo don't have White House reporters? That's better for readers. That's better for democracy. It seems to be anti-pluralistic.
They'll always be. They'll have. I think those newspapers. I hope those newspapers will continue to survive. I'm not interested in newspapers disappearing. I wish they could all survive. I think they will find different roles, different métiers. I think some of them will cover national news. And by the way, if they do, it's a competitive marketplace. If Pittsburgh newspapers or St. Louis newspapers have great White House reporters who break stories, who do incredibly important stuff, those newspapers, they will survive. They will continue to do that. I'm not saying that either that those papers will disappear in any kind of national role, or that it's a good thing that they would disappear at all. I'm simply saying that I think the logic of the marketplace and the logic of, more importantly, of the digital transformation is that you will get a concentration on the national front. And if we go down from, 250 news organizations having a White House correspondent to 30 or 40, I'm all in favor of pluralism too, but pluralism has to be supported in the end by economic reality, and I just don't think economic reality was able to support the kind of the kind of newspaper structure that the United States now has.
Terry Baker, thank you very much. You were just terrific. Wait, don't go away yet, because I have to give you your new membership in the Society of the Solarians, which we now do for
Thank you. That's very kind.
real news people. Thank you very much.